The year was 2029. Beneath a crumbling Soviet-era bunker hidden in the frost-covered hills of southern Belarus, a quiet revolution was being mapped not in slogans or speeches, but in blueprints, power maps, and a digital projection of Africa's entire energy grid. A table scarred by decades of secret meetings, now illuminated by the cold glow of LED screens, played host to three of the most enigmatic figures of the geopolitical South. Vladimir Putin, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, and the lesser-known but equally calculating Nyasha Bavute, an economic architect turned president of Zimbabwe. Their summit, unrecorded by Western intelligence and omitted from all diplomatic cables, was a masterclass in silent resistance. The topic? The African century. Each man had arrived by separate, untraceable routes. Traoré, the charismatic and defiant military leader who had come to power in a bloodless coup, represented a new generation of post-colonial pragmatists. Vute, a soft-spoken technocrat once trained in Oxford and disillusioned by IMF cycles, had turned to Eurasian alliances for developmental salvation. And Putin? He was there not just as a legacy leader, but as a strategist who recognized the power shift no one in Brussels or Washington dared admit. Africa was no longer a continent of charity. It was the next great theater of design. The West, Putin began, tapping a cigarette on the rim of an ashtray carved from Siberian quartz, builds castles in the sky. But Africa? Africa has minerals in its soil, uranium in its rivers, and fire in its youth. What it needs is not advice. It needs a spine. Traoré nodded. We don't need saviors. We need systems. On the wall, a real-time model of the Nairobi-Lagos Pan-African Rail Initiative pulsed like a living organism. Every node had been simulated. Freight patterns, water stress indexes, fiber optic coverage, population forecasts. A continent once fragmented by Berlin's pencils was now being digitally rewired by Africans, for Africans. But to understand how such audacity came to be, one must rewind to the story that began not in a bunker, but in a dusty corner of Ouagadougou 5 years earlier, when Traoré made his first controversial move, rejecting a $500 million mosque project from Saudi Arabia. The media called it anti-religious. Washington called it ungrateful. But to Traoré, it was symbolic warfare. They don't send mosques, they send ideology, he once said in a televised speech banned on Western networks. Instead, he broke ground on the African School of Strategic Systems, a think tank crossbred with a university, built not by Chinese contractors but by local cooperatives. Its first curriculum included courses like data sovereignty, infrastructure psychology, and the economics of extraction. Meanwhile, across the continent, a silent pivot was underway. Rwanda began constructing a city powered entirely by decentralized solar grids, with servers owned by community shareholders. Ghana nationalized its cobalt reserves, issuing digital tokens pegged to raw output rather than Western fiat. Ethiopia reversed the outflow of engineers with the Radical Scholarship for Land program, and Namibia declared all cloud data generated on its soil to be a national resource. This was not African nationalism. This was African systems theory, and while the West debated token reparations or charity concerts, a deeper current had taken root. A new class of African planners, part engineer, part philosopher, part resistance theorist, was emerging. Their doctrine was neither Marxist nor neoliberal. It was infrastructural sovereignty. Their textbooks weren't Harvard white papers, but leaked Chinese central planning memos, 1970s Cuban energy blueprints, and yes, transcripts from underground meetings like the one in Belarus. To outsiders, it looked like disobedience. But to those inside the movement, it was discipline. In Johannesburg, a new concept was being tested, the Urban Sovereignty Index. It measured a city's ability to function independently of global supply chains for 30 days. Lagos scored 13. Nairobi, 21. A town in Malawi, shockingly, scored 39. The metric became gospel. Leaders were judged not by GDP but by USI. It wasn't about wealth, it was about endurance. And then came the digital firewall, patterned loosely on China's Great Firewall, but cloaked in Pan-African rhetoric. The AfricaNet protocol was a decentralized system of nodes, ensuring that any data generated on the continent would first pass through a regional AI hub before leaving. It wasn't censorship, it was filtration. The world mines our data as it mined our gold. No more, said Bvute, unveiling Zimbabwe's sovereign search engine, Mudzimu. The backlash was swift. Western firms froze funding. The IMF stalled budget support for 6 nations. Washington issued vague threats of sanctions. But a counter-alliance unofficial, unnamed, was already in play. Russia offered encryption infrastructure. Iran shared drone swarm logistics. Brazil opened up its public education AI platform. And from China came what many now call the silent catalyst, a series of back-channel planning modules designed to simulate national industrial ecosystems over 30-year horizons. All this culminated in what is now simply called the Maputo Shift. On August 18, 2031, during what appeared to be a routine energy summit, 18 African nations signed a confidential protocol. It included mutual protection of data assets, a commitment to net zero import of processed food by 2040, and the creation of a transcontinental military-civilian force to protect critical infrastructure. NATO dismissed it as performative. But satellite images told another story. Coordinated construction of mirror energy nodes, logistics rings, and bunkers not unlike the one in Belarus. The core idea was simple but radical. Build so much, connect so wide, plan so far that the system cannot be reversed, even by regime change or external pressure. It was in this context that Traoré reappeared in Moscow, then slipped quietly to the Belarus bunker. Not for weapons, but for the blueprint of irreversible infrastructure. "We are not here to mimic China," he said during the summit, his voice calm, unwavering. "We are here to learn how to resist like China did, and then to do what China couldn't, to build with spirit." Putin, who had watched empires rise and fall, leaned back and said nothing, but he understood. This wasn't about geopolitics. It was about geostructure. And so the plans were laid. Roads not just to mines, but to memory. Power grids not just for electricity, but for identity. A new Africa, designed not for applause, but for permanence.